Very much for the platform and the opportunity. So I will take off from where Amin stopped. In his concluding remarks, he mentioned that local content is very important and companies must be interested in investing or helping countries to retain value, which I agree. But again, he made a statement that the country ought to study the needs of the company ought to study the needs of the country and then respond to it. That is where I have an issue. As a country, you need to have a development philosophy. No company can do that for you. You have to be serious. Serious jurisdictions have followed a certain philosophy, and that has informed their development priorities. And that informs the country's policies for each sector and how these sectors should be linked. And then they'll come up with a final document which informs the law that gives certainty to investors. So investors must not be burdened. It is important for investors to understand the capacity of companies, the countries. That is very important. But what I'm saying here is that countries need to take initiatives in ensuring that they map out the capacity gaps and then communicate clearly to investors what is needed to fill the gaps. Now, I'll take us to the local content law. Because when Barbara was speaking, she mentioned something that is very important. She said there is no procedure for targeting the sectors. So as we can see, everybody is doing their own thing in terms of local content, but the sectors are really linked. And this goes back to the point I made earlier. If you do not have a philosophy and if you don't define the capacities, the companies would fill the capacities, but then what impacts would we have? What outcomes will we see? Now, if you take our local content law, for the oil and gas sector, the LI 2204, and you study critically the objectives stated, you realize that there's a lot of repetitions. That is one. And then the provisions in there are replication of local content provisions of other African countries. That is two. It tells you that where was our philosophy when we're developing this law? Now, there is evidence to show that we did not even have a clear philosophy. If you look at the law, it tells you in the objectives that we want to develop local capacities in the petroleum industry through education, training, skills transfer, etc. We wrote this without knowledge again of the capacities because this law became law in 2013. But then the Petroleum Commission undertook skills gap in 2015. So you can see that the law even came before the skills gap. Now let's look at the mining industry. The mining sector also has a local content policy. When Barbara mentioned that it was woefully inadequate, I totally agreed with her. Because I have done a research this year with a senior research fellow at the Chamber of Mines. And our research shows that the local content law, LI 2173, in the mining industry has had no impact at all in terms of job creation, in terms of goods and services and their procurement. And that is because we have not followed any clear objective. You realize that this LI was passed in 2012. But then when you look at the hierarchy of laws, there ought to be a policy out of which laws are developed. Now, the policy for the mining sector came in 2014. The mining sector policy talks about value addition. But the LI does not say anything about value addition. But it is this LI that the Minerals Commission is implementing. So it tells us that there are inconsistencies in our own laws, and that does not give certainty. So we have to be serious about developing our priorities, setting our priorities right, and connecting the sectors. From our research, we realize that there's a requirement for, mining companies need lubricants, and these are supplied by companies in country. But the companies the supply is limited to Shell and then Total. But we have an oil and gas downstream sector that could feed into the industry. So what is our local content policy in the mining sector trying to do? So basically, my whole point is that it is not too late. We need to sit down and harmonize all our laws, harmonize our objectives for each sector. It is through that that we would have a clear-cut view where to prioritize. Now, let me use Sudan as a case study here. I've had the opportunity to research on the impact of Chinese investments in oil and gas countries in 3 countries, African countries, Nigeria, Ghana, and Sudan. And ACEP is doing this with Dundee University and the Open University in the UK. And from the discussions I've had with the Minister of Petroleum in Sudan and other key players in the industry, Sudan has a plan. And their plan is very, very clear. They know what they can do and what they cannot do. That is because they put a lot of thought into it. They know that within the short term, they cannot achieve good local content in terms of local procurement. So their focus is mainly on employment. Their agenda in the oil and gas industry is to ensure that they take over, they have the capacity to develop their own fields. So if you take Sudapet as the national oil company, for instance, it is totally independent. It does not hold its interest for the state. It holds it for itself. And it has subsidiaries that conduct upstream activities. And they have partnered with Chinese companies and have experienced transfers. So they have a plan for even the transfer of skills and how to measure that. They have a plan for that.